I don't know if you're like me, but whenever you see a question like that, what if the church blessed the community, and you thought about the reality that God would want to use you to bless somebody else by using you to share his good news with somebody. I don't know how you react to that, but if you're like me, you think, well, isn't that why we have guys that are pastors and women who are pastors and people in ministry, because that's what they're supposed to do? And that's what their job is, to share Jesus with other people. Yeah, it's not my job to do that. It's their job. I mean, that's the reason they have the microphone. That's why they're on the stage. That's why I invite them to the church, to the service, so they can share Jesus. That's their job to do it. And I know this is ironic, but I've had that mentality too a lot in life. I see, the way I grew up as a pastor's kid, and that was my dad's job. My dad's job was to tell people about Jesus. I just got to, if my part was to just invite them to listen to my dad teach about Jesus. And growing up in ministry, I even became a minister myself, but I still gave myself this free pass not to do that because I was a music minister. And so I'll lead the singing, and I'll let the pastor tell people about Jesus. This isn't what I'm supposed to do. This is what that guy does, or that lady does in that ministry. It's not what we do. And then maybe you're like me, like the second end of that is the reason it's not me because I don't know what they know. They know what they know. They've got letters behind their names. They know how to talk to people in this. They know how to get, they love to do it. I'm scared to death to share Jesus with people. I'm scared Jesus just to raise my hand to acknowledge that I'm a Jesus person, much less engage in that. And when we think about this, that God wants to use you to share the most amazing news ever with the people around them, sometimes it's a little intimidating. Maybe you're not like me. Maybe you're not as intimidated as I was. And that's why I'm really excited about this series that we're doing, not just with Westside Family Church that's in Lenexa and Westside Family Church that's the Speedway, but we're also doing it with the 40 other churches in our Kansas City metro area that we're asking this question together, and we're specifically partnering with Wallula Christian Center just south of us, Christian Church right south of us here on K7, and we're asking this question, what if the church really blessed the neighborhood, and what if I really engaged in this? And we've looked at this and we've broken this series down. And the reason I like this is because I believe that when we answer how we can do this and we begin to engage in this, it makes it really practical for you and I. That we don't have to be the person on the platform on the other side of the microphone. That we don't have to be the one who is the professional Christian. Or we don't have to know really all the answers. See, the beautiful thing about bless is it's a rhythm that is accessible to all of us. And this is what we're talking about in this whole series is this idea that God has blessed you. That he blessed and he's offered you and it brought you into a blessing that started, we talked about this last week, with Abraham. That through Abraham, God said to Abraham, I'm going to bless everyone through you. And I'm going to bless all nations through you. Then Jesus comes. Jesus is a part of our story. He invites you into a relationship with him because he finished the work by living the life you couldn't live. And he died the death that paid for all of our sin. And he invites you into this life. And therefore, you've received a blessing. And by receiving the blessing, you know what you get to join in? You get to join in this mission of being the blessing. And that's our series' big idea that we're talking about is how you, wherever you are, in your ordinary, you feel like it's an ordinary life, how could God use me type of life? That God wants to use your life to bless others. And that's a series' big idea. I want you to write this in as we get started today, that God has blessed me so I can bless people where I live, work, and play. That God has blessed you with the most amazing news, that he's given you a relationship with God. You are no longer separated by your sin, but because of Jesus, you have been invited into the most incredible blessing. And to be invited into that blessing is to be invited to share that blessing with other people. To share that, to engage in your mission of joining Jesus on his mission wherever he is. And this is how we began doing this is we broke bless down into an acronym that I'm going to give you the full acronym today. And that begins by beginning with prayer. See, the B in this is begin with prayer. And if you missed last week, I encourage you to go online to Westside Leavenworth and you can look it up there. Because when we begin with prayer, I believe this is our posture. This is how we posture ourselves before God. And we begin with prayer, a prayer that says, God, where are you at work around me? And the people with whom I live, with whom I play, and with whom I work, where are you at work around me? And how can I join you in the work that you're already doing? That there are people in pivotal circumstances, that their life is shifting right now. Maybe they're moving in, they're moving out. Maybe they just had a baby. Or they're going through a rough time, or they just had landed a dream job, but their life is in a shift, in a pivot. And where are you at work? Because a lot of times we talked last week that God is at work in those pivotal circumstances around us. So we begin with prayer. Secondly, we listen. This is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm not going to talk about it much now, but then we eat. And this you don't want to miss next week because we're going to talk about how spiritual it really is to eat. And some of you are going to be very, very spiritual this weekend. You don't want to miss next week because I believe this is an art, literally an art that we've lost in our society because we're going to talk a little bit about it today, but we've lost this art of eating and engaging in this way. And then S, the first S is serve. All this sets us up to posture us and position us to be able to serve someone. Be able to serve the person that's far from God. And you might not know how, but God has gifted you with everything you already need to serve the people he's sending you to. And when you posture yourself before him and you position yourself to listen and eat, you're going to be automatically in a position where you can serve somebody with the gifts that God's already given you. That it's not about doing something that you're not comfortable in doing, but it's really about doing something that you're already gifted and tooled with to serve other people. And we're going to talk about that. And then the last one is story. And this is the beautiful thing about, I believe you and you and you is because all of us together are part of God's amazing story. His story has been written on our lives. We bear God's story. And whenever you share your story, you're sharing God's story. You don't have to share what you feel like you need to share. You can share your story and how it connects with that other person. And when your life, and you share your life, after learning about their life, you get the opportunity to share the story of God because your story contains his story. And we're going to talk about that in our last week together. And all of this is going to set up the opportunity, hopefully, that you, and maybe your life group or the person that you're you're engaging in this series with, maybe it's your family, maybe it's your spouse, you can engage and you can bless them. Hopefully by the end of the series, you're going to find somebody, God's going to lead somebody to you in your life group that you can serve and you can engage in that way. But I believe blessing begins by listening. And listening is not something that we do very well. And it's not just because I'm a guy. It's not something I do well. And maybe it's not something you do well either. And these are some reasons I believe we might not listen well. And the first one is this. Write this in your notes. We are too busy. I said it. We're busy. Don't you feel like whenever somebody asks you, how are things going? You almost feel obligated to say, oh man, we're busy. And in that, when we're too busy to listen. When our schedule and our agenda is so jam-packed, we don't really have margin to listen to other people. And there's several reasons that may be, but I believe one of them is I think our society has elevated our self-worth to equal our busyness. That your value, your success is equal to how busy you are. So when people ask you, man, how are things going? You feel obligated to say, I'm just so busy. And really what we've done is we've, in this world of self-worth, and we have to elevate ourselves and make ourselves look good before other people, that way it comes out is we're too busy. And what happens, I believe, on the outset of that, is that we don't have time to listen to people. That we're so about our agenda that we don't want to make time to other people because it's going to impede on our agenda. In fact, you might not be listening to me right now because you're already thinking about what you got to do this afternoon, tomorrow. You got that project. You got to go to Home Depot to get that stuff. And you're already creating your list, and you're not even listening to me. And that's okay? I didn't mean to judge you because I do that too. But we get too busy to listen. Second reason is we might feel obligated to do something. Have you ever resisted listening to somebody or asking that question or getting engaged in that conversation because you might feel responsible to do something? That you don't want to call them back because if you call them back, you're going to be on the phone for maybe a little bit longer than you want to be. It goes back to problem number one, we're too busy. Which I think is also rooted in number 3 reason is we are prideful. This is kind of the hard one to swallow. And it's awkward for me to kind of say because you know who feels or who's really the most important person, who sees himself as the most important person in a conversation? The one who can't stop talking. It makes me feel real awkward right now. But isn't that truth? It's sometimes we're so focused on ourselves, we're so narcissistic that we can't even stop to engage in the other person. That it's about our pain, it's about our stress, our problems, that we're not even willing to listen to the other person's pain, problems, struggles, hopes, dreams, because our focus is on us. And we have ideas, but we're not willing to listen to their ideas. That we're wanting to be heard so bad that we're not even willing to hear someone else. And then there's another one that I thought of and this one is an indictment maybe on the church. Maybe you've lost interest in the church and you're coming back, and the reason you lost interest in the church is this reason right here, is because they didn't listen to you because we would rather judge than engage. Now let me explain that one to you, because this one's just a little unique. I believe we would rather write somebody off than engage in their story. And a lot of times this happens, maybe they have a different point of view or they stand on the different side of the issue. Maybe they opposed you on a position at work, or maybe they voted on a different category, or maybe they just live a different type of lifestyle than you. And what we do sometimes is we see their behaviors and we see their actions and we write them off. And maybe you're here today and somebody in church a long time ago or somebody that's a Jesus person a long time ago wrote you off. And you know what that did to you? They were like, they didn't even listen to my story. They didn't even show they cared for me. They just judged me. They just concluded. They jumped to conclusions without jumping in to listen to me. And a lot of times I feel like we often, because we like to make quick judgments. One, we want to value our time. We can't really spend time listening, so we jump to conclusions. We don't engage in listening. And then I think another reason that we don't listen is we're waiting to speak. I don't know. I mean, this is something that's hard for me because you'll be talking, maybe your spouse, your kids, or maybe someone at work, and they're going blah, 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 and he just kind of goes into the Charlie Brown, womp, 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 and then you hear pause. And then all you're thinking about is what you're wanting to say. Have you ever caught yourself doing that? Like you were just waiting for the pause to jump in and make your point. Jump in and say what you want to say that you were thinking of, because it's all about what you have to say and not what they have that they need to be heard. And you make your point, and then they just look at you and go, did you not even hear anything I just said to you? You know, sometimes those are good, that they're not as awkward moments. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, you know what, I just had a lot on my mind. Or sometimes it's like, well, I just made a point, but you just missed the point because I was bearing my soul to you and you weren't listening to me. And a lot of times I believe sometimes we really want to make a point. You know, we're opinionated people and we like to have our opinions heard, which is not bad. And there are times that we have points of view that we might even be right biblically. And we know that that's the way through the filter we see the Jesus-centered view of life and how his truth intersects our lives, and we want to intersect their life, that we want to make a point. But this is my caution to all of us. Write this in your notes. Don't make a point that forfeits making a difference. Don't make a point that forfeits making a difference in someone's life. Because sometimes you might have a good point, but your posture and your position doesn't give you the opportunity to make a difference, because sometimes when we lead with the point, guess what happens? We create distance. I don't know about you, but sometimes the most opinionated people, maybe on Facebook, on social media, maybe in your office, they're the ones that push people away. And when I look at this, Jesus wasn't one who pushed people away. Jesus was an inviting persona. He was a welcoming presence amongst the people. People that were not even like him loved to be around Jesus because he postured himself differently. And he had a point to make, and he would make his point. But it wasn't always that he led with this point. In fact, when he led with this point, it was with a certain crowd of people, the religious crowd, but the people that were far from God, the people that he said, I have here come to seek and save those who are lost. When he was around the tax collector, he would position himself differently. And I believe it started with the posture that he had. And this is why, this is that posture I think he had. Right? Listen, Jesus would listen in prayer. What was his posture? It was a posture that he looked to God in heaven, and while he was here on this earth, and he was in flesh because he was God in a body, he would listen, he would prioritize, and he would posture himself to say, God, I want to do your work. That's why in John, this disciple of Jesus who walked with Jesus, heard Jesus, saw him come back to life and said, you know what, I'm going to share this message of Jesus and I'm going to record. He goes, Jesus finished the work that his Father came. In fact, he records words that Jesus said, I have come to do the work of my Father. And Jesus would posture himself in a way that he could get before God and say, God, I want your way more than I want my way. And he did it through prayer. And we say, and I believe that he would do this. And Luke records this in his account of Jesus in chapter 5 of verse 16. He says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He would get away and pray. Now, often could be daily, often could be twice a day, it could be weekly, a couple times a week. He just did it regularly. Luke's trying to let you and I know that he had a posture before God that was a posture of prayer, a posture that says, God, I am here on your mission, not my agenda. See, this might be my agenda today, but today that agenda is submitted to your agenda. And what I believe is Jesus would then, as he was listening to God in prayer in this posture, he was then positioned. And Jesus, I believe this, listens to people. He just didn't listen back in the day, but he continues to listen now. And he hears the cry of people who are far from God. That their cry is unique because they might not be crying out for God because they might not know they need God. It's like a person who's lost, that they might know they're lost, but they don't know which direction they need to go or who they need to find. They're just lost. And they need someone to help them find their way back to God. And Jesus said, those are the people that I've come and I hear their cry. And I hear the pain. And their cry is different. See, they cry out and it might go towards different things. It might be a cry that it's for a relationship, or it might be a cry that leads them to be a workaholic or to strive for success. But all inside of them is this drive that they need something to be satisfied in life, and they're crying out for that fulfillment. And as Christ followers, as Jesus people, we know that the depth of that fulfillment is only found in a relationship with our Father in heaven that Jesus came to bring. And when Jesus was here on earth, he positioned himself and he listened to people, and he listens to people. And the way he listens to people today is, I believe, through the church. But we are to model how he listened back then. So let's look at how he listened. This is not something that is explicit in Scripture, but I want to look at how this is implicitly there, that Jesus listened to the people around him. In Luke chapter 18, Luke records this, that Jesus was going to Jericho. And as he was on his way to Jericho, a blind man was sitting along the roadside begging. And when this blind man heard the crowd going by, because wherever Jesus went, he drew a crowd. That the religious people wanted to hear him. They were trying to catch him in his fallacy, trying to get him to where they could push the crowd away from him and make him look like a heretic and someone who is against God, and therefore push him away and therefore eliminate his influence. And so they were there, but the people that Jesus was there to reach were there too. The people far from him. And this blind beggar was there as this crowd was walking by. And something unique about a blind beggar is it's easy to know that a person's blind. It's easy to know also, like you think a blind beggar, what they need, especially when you have a guy that's been walking through and he's been healing people and he's been doing all these miraculous things. And look what happens here in the story. When he heard the crowd going by, this blind beggar asked what was happening, and the crowd tells him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And he takes this opportunity. And he called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And then look what happens. Maybe this is something that happens with church people, I don't know, or Jesus people, like people that lived in church and grew up in church. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Hey, we're on a mission here. Hey, you know what? Hey, Jesus is here, but he's not here for you. Hey, he's here, but he's for us. It's for us, not you. In fact, in this society, to be blind was in a way to have God's rejection on your life. Because it was only because of your sin that you were sick, and God wasn't here for sinners. He was here for the healthy, the people that had it all together, the people that were religious, the people that acted like they knew it all. And in this moment, this blind beggar that society has rejected, and we see the rejection here as they rebuke him. This blind beggar says, Son of David, have mercy, pity me. Show compassion my way. Son of David, will you see me? Will you see me that I can't see? Will you see me that I am blind? Will you have compassion on me? And look what happens. Jesus stops and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he did this, the crowd stopped and I believe fell silent. And I can only imagine in Jesus' day how many times he silenced the crowd. And in this moment, this blind beggar is brought to him at Jesus' request. And Jesus asks him, wait a second, Casey. Isn't it kind of obvious what he needs? Isn't it kind of obvious? Shouldn't we assume we know what this guy needs? Shouldn't we assume that, okay, he's blind. Obviously, he probably walked up there and it was probably obvious to Jesus, much less the fact that Jesus is all-knowing, omniscient. He knows everything because he's always listening. But that's the thing here, is Jesus is always listening. And look what Jesus does. He asks. He doesn't make a point, but he engages with the question. He doesn't assume that he knows what this guy needs. And I mean, even though he knew what this guy needed, doesn't take Captain Obvious to see that. And a lot of times I think we have people around us that we think we know what they need. But we're not willing to ask them what they need. And so Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? Ask a question. How can I help you? Lord, I want to see. Simple request. He said to him, receive your sight, your faith has healed you. And immediately he receives his sight and follows Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also rejoiced and praised God. I believe we need to learn to posture ourselves and position ourselves like Jesus. And the posture we need to first have is this, to listen to God. See, I believe listening to God helps us discover where he's already on mission. Just as Jesus would withdraw to remote places and often pray, we need to position ourselves, we need to posture ourselves and listen to God. We need to listen to the Father and say, God, where are you already at work? And that's why blesseveryhome.com, if you were here last week, you heard us talk about blesseveryhome.com, that when you go and you log in and you get an account at blesseveryhome.com, it's free, and you get a map of your neighborhood, and you get the addresses, and what you're doing is you're posturing yourself before God to say, God, I want to listen to you. I want to listen to you on behalf of my neighbors where I live. I want to listen to you on behalf of the people where I work, and I want to listen to you on behalf of the people with whom I play. And this is how we posture ourselves to engage in mission. And when we listen, not just to God, but listening to people is important too, because when we listen to people, that's how we position ourselves. Right? Listen, listening to others is how we engage in his mission. While you might be listening to God and say, God, where are you at work? What areas of my city, what areas of my neighborhood are you at work in? Whose life is in a pivotal circumstance right now that I can engage? And you find it out. You see what's happening in the news, and maybe God puts a burden on your heart, and that burden is God saying, hey, I'm at work in that area. Or God puts a neighbor on your heart that you see bringing a baby home. And God, you go, man, are you at work there? But when you then have that posture and you position yourself, you engage in mission. Because you can't be on mission without being in the middle of the crowd like Jesus was. Jesus had to get in the middle of the crowd to hear the blind man. And I think it begs us to say, what does listening do then to the people by which we listen? And that's a teaching big idea that I want us to look at, and I want you to leave with today, because I believe listening does this. It communicates something. Listening communicates love and acceptance. Isn't that interesting that listening communicates? But that by hearing, we're saying, by listening, we're describing something, we're sharing something. By listening, we communicate. See, a lot of times we want to position ourselves to make the point because that's how we want to communicate. But we need to make the point, and we need to communicate love and acceptance, which is the first taste of the gospel of Jesus that we can embrace and be to the people around us where we live, work, and play. And it begins by listening, because you know what listening does? Listening shows somebody that you value them. Listening says that you are worth my time. You are worth me taking the time to sit with you and hear you. And you know what it also communicates? I accept you. Now, acceptance we get a little fearful of because we might not accept their position, but you can accept somebody without accepting their position. You can accept somebody without accepting their lifestyle. See, accepting is what we do. We are the gospel, and you are accepted. That it wasn't your behavior that made you right with God. It was that God said, I choose you. And he comes and he shows his love and it offers his acceptance to you. And that's what we are. We are accepted by a loving God who demonstrates his love by coming to die for us. And we can demonstrate his love by dying to our agenda, dying to the fact that we want to make a point right now. And we posture ourselves to listen to him, listen to others. And when we do that, it communicates love. It communicates acceptance. I love what David Oxberg says. I put it in your notes. It says, being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. Maybe you've been listened to before and someone listened to you and you felt so loved afterwards. Have you ever been there? And you just felt like, oh, you know what? I feel like they understand. They didn't agree maybe with you, but they at least understood you. And in fact, that's kind of where we find our acceptance, is when people now understand us. And a lot of times people feel like we write them off because we've never taken the time to just listen to their story. Get to know them. And we write them off because they stand on the different political side of the fence. Or we write them off because they resisted our idea at work. Or we write them off because they don't like what our dog does in their yard. That just came to me. I didn't say that in any other services. It's scary being up here. But listening communicates love and acceptance. And that is the first taste that we, the body of Jesus, can be to other people. Is we might not agree with people, we might not agree with our neighbor, might not agree with the person across the street, or we might see differently, but we can listen to them and their story and engage. And you know what listening does? Listening positions us to learn and understand. It puts you in a position that you can be vulnerable to learn from somebody else. Well, I know it all, Casey. Well, Jesus knew it all. He made everything. And he positions himself and asks a question. See, it teaches us to position ourselves so we can learn from other people's story. And when we learn other people's story and we understand them, I love really what Stephen Covey says in A Habit of Successful People, is that they seek first to understand before being understood. Many of us need to practice that in marriage or with our kids, our teenagers. But when we practice that with the people around us, that before we come to our point, we find out why you have that opinion. And what that does is listening then builds trust. And trust is the currency by which relationships are built. It's what builds your currency. It's what builds the value in the other person. And when somebody feels like you listen to them, they feel like they can trust you. And it's when they trust you that they might one day trust the Jesus who is alive inside of you. Because listening builds trust. And we can bless others by building the trust in others, in the Jesus who is alive inside of us, by listening to them. And by listening to them, listening reveals how we can serve. See, it doesn't just position you in with people to build trust with people, but it'll position you so you can serve people. And you're going to see an opportunity to serve them. But it doesn't come without listening to them. I was working at a construction firm doing marketing here in Kansas City, and God taught me to listen. I was that guy that was the music pastor that didn't know how to share Jesus. Didn't want to because there were other people that would do that. Didn't feel like I was educated enough to do that, and it felt like it was that I wasn't as smart or good in those situations to share Jesus. But God taught me that you can listen to people, and listening to people, you can show love and acceptance. And that happened with one guy that I was at work with. And through this, I just engaged him. He knew I was a pastor. He knew that I was on the other side of some fences politically and even socially and in practice and in behaviors. But you know what I do? I just listened to him. He would invite me to go out for drinks, which I kindly denied because I just didn't drink. I don't drink. And I would listen to his story. I'd listen to how bad his weekend or how good it was. I'd listen to what he did, and I might not have agreed with what he did, but I'd listen to him. And he'd constantly share with me. We'd go places to job sites, and I'd listen to him. And I was like, God, how am I at work here? And then one day, after starting employment at Westside Family Church in Lenexa, I get a phone call, and it's this friend that I had worked in, my colleague. He goes, Casey, I'm struggling. I've arrived to a point that I'm about ready to lose my family if I don't get something under control, and I just feel like you could be the person that could help me. And in that moment, I was able to lead my buddy to Jesus. You know how I built that opportunity? I postured myself, said, God, I want to be used by you. And I positioned myself to listen. year went by before I had the opportunity. But a year of trust was built. And I was able to share my story, that I'm a lot like him. I'm far from God without Jesus. And I was able to lead him to Jesus by sharing my story. But I would have never had that opportunity had I not listened to him. So this is my encouragement to you. Write this in. Practice listening. Practice, practice, practice. We're not good at it, but we need to make time for it. We need to elevate others in the importance in the conversation and turn that into a question to learn about them. We need to maybe shut the lawnmower off, go across the street when they're outside and just say, hey, ask a question by saying, hey, what's your name? We can ask questions too. See, we practice listening by asking the right questions and asking questions that get to know them, asking questions about their pains, their hopes, their fears. Ask them questions that don't paint, that don't polarize, but draw them in. Like one question could be, how did you come to that conclusion? I'd love to hear the story of how you came to that point of view. You might stand totally on the polar opposite side of the fence and believe something totally different, but you can build trust by saying, hey, I'd love to hear someday how you came to that. What makes you believe in that? What made you choose that way? Or what brought you here to this town? I'd love to hear about it. Maybe we could do it over coffee, or I'd love to have you over for dinner. See, I believe when we practice listening, that's when we begin to bless. And write this in. We can bless others best when we listen first and talk less. So my question to you today, are you ready to listen? Let's posture ourselves right now. Jesus, thank you. Thank you so much that you came and you modeled for us this posture. That we should be on your Father's business, on his work. And that we should be listening to you. So I pray that you remove the distractions, whether it's busyness or the selfishness in our life. May you remove that, and may we repent of those things. And may we posture ourselves before you, say, God, we want your mission. And God, may we position ourselves with the people around us, where we live, work, and play. And may we begin to communicate your love and your acceptance by listening to them. Because that's how we can bless them best, is by learning to listen. And in learning to listen, we'll communicate your good news and giving them a first taste of that. May you give us the courage to do this. In your name, amen. We have some prayer partners that are available that they would love to listen to you and ask how they can pray with you. So if you'd like to pray with them, they would love to pray with you today. God bless you, Westside. We'll see you next Sunday as we continue to bless our neighborhood.